It was 3:17 a.m. over the Strait of Hormuz, and the Persian Gulf was doing what it always does in July, sitting heavy and still under a wet blanket of heat that makes the air feel like something you breathe through rather than into. Visibility: 7 miles through haze. Sea state: 1. The kind of night where the horizon disappears and the water and the sky blur into the same dark nothing. A night that feels, to the untrained eye, like nothing is happening at all. The USS Abraham Lincoln, CVN-72, had been operating in the northern Arabian Sea and Persian Gulf region for 41 days. Carrier Strike Group 9, 100,000 tons of nuclear-powered American naval power, flanked by the cruiser USS Philippine Sea with her 122 vertical launch system cells, 3 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, USS Truxtun, USS John Finn, and USS Preble, a Los Angeles-class fast-attack submarine running silent at undisclosed depth, and a combat logistics force vessel keeping the entire formation fueled and armed at sea. The Air Wing embarked aboard Lincoln comprised over 70 aircraft, F/A-18E and F/A-18F Super Hornets, EA-18G Growlers, E-2D Advanced Hawkeyes, MH-60R Seahawks, and a handful of assets that the Navy's official public affairs guidance doesn't discuss in detail at press conferences. The Abraham Lincoln was not supposed to be newsworthy that week. She was conducting scheduled operations, maritime security, freedom of navigation transits, and theater presence designed to communicate, clearly and without ambiguity, that the United States Navy considers the Persian Gulf and Strait of Hormuz to be international waters through which American warships sail when they choose, for as long as they choose, at whatever speed and heading they choose. Tehran had, as Tehran frequently does, communicated its displeasure with this arrangement through official channels, state media, and the periodic buzzing of U.S. ships by IRGC fast patrol boats, whose crews had apparently never been briefed on how quickly an MH-60R helicopter can appear from behind a superstructure when it decides to. At 2:50 a.m., 27 minutes before the moment this story begins, a signals intelligence satellite in geosynchronous orbit registered a sharp spike in encrypted communications traffic from a hardened facility in the Zagros Mountains, approximately 340 kilometers northeast of Bandar Abbas. The spike was cross-referenced automatically against a library of known Iranian military communications signatures. The classification came back in seconds. IRGC Aerospace Force Launch Preparation Coordination. The data was pushed down the chain immediately. By 2:54 a.m., the E-2D Advanced Hawkeye, already airborne over the Gulf, had been tasked to redirect its AN/A PY-9 radar coverage toward the Iranian coast. By 2:58 a.m., the TAO aboard USS Philippine Sea had been briefed, was standing at his display, and had already run through the defensive engagement envelope calculations in his head while his Aegis Combat System ran them in silicon simultaneously, with considerably more precision and at roughly 10 million times the speed. At 3:17 a.m., the launches happened. The IRGC Aerospace Force fired a salvo of 8 Emad ballistic missiles from mobile transporter erector launchers dispersed across 3 sites in Khuzestan Province and the Zagros foothills. The Emad is Iran's most advanced domestically produced ballistic missile, a medium-range weapon with an official range of 1,700 kilometers, a separating reentry vehicle designed to complicate terminal phase interception, and a claimed circular error probable of roughly 500 meters. Iranian state television had featured the Emad prominently in multiple propaganda broadcasts, typically shown launching dramatically into a desert sky, accompanied by Revolutionary Guards officers watching from a tent and looking appropriately resolute. What those broadcasts never showed, because the people producing them didn't know or didn't want to know, was what the Emad looks like to an SPY-1B radar array from the moment its motor ignites. It looks exactly like a ballistic missile launch. Every single one of them, all 8, visible on the Aegis radar picture within 4 seconds of ignition. The AN/SPY-1B phased array radar aboard USS Philippine Sea had been tracking the launch sites since the E-2D redirect. When the first Emad motor lit, the radar had it. When the second lit, 1.3 seconds later, the radar had that one too. By the time all 8 missiles were in powered flight, climbing through 40,000 feet on their boost phase arc toward the Gulf, the Aegis Combat System aboard Philippine Sea had already solved the intercept equations for every single one of them, allocated intercept assets, computed optimal engagement altitudes, and presented a color-coded firing recommendation to the TAO that was, frankly, almost insultingly comprehensive in its confidence. 8 missiles, 8 solutions. The system wasn't concerned. It was doing math. Let's talk for a moment about the nature of that math, because it explains everything about what was going to happen next and why it was never going to end any other way. The Emad ballistic missile achieves a maximum velocity of approximately 3.5 kilometers per second during its terminal descent phase. That sounds extraordinarily fast, and by any human scale measure it is. But terminal ballistic intercept is not a human scale problem. It is solved entirely by machines operating in microseconds, tracking a target whose physics are entirely predictable. A ballistic object follows the laws of Newtonian mechanics with perfect fidelity. It does not jink. It does not employ electronic countermeasures. It does not detect the interceptor coming. The Emad's separating reentry vehicle was designed in the mid-2000s to complicate intercept by introducing a modest degree of attitude control in the terminal phase, allowing minor course corrections. Iranian engineers were proud of this. Against the SM-3 Block IIA missile, the capability is roughly equivalent to a man with a paddle trying to redirect a freight train. The SM-3 Block IIA, developed jointly by the United States and Japan in a program that cost billions of dollars and 20 years of integration work, is not a missile in the traditional sense of the word. It is a kinetic kill vehicle delivery system. The SM-3 does not carry an explosive warhead. It carries a 21-pound kinetic warhead, a Hittile, that destroys its target by colliding with it at a closing velocity that releases energy equivalent to a 10-ton truck hitting a wall at 600 miles per hour. It intercepts outside the atmosphere in the exoatmospheric phase of the ballistic trajectory, where the re-entry vehicle is above most countermeasures and moving on a predictable arc. The SM-3 is steered by a divert and attitude control system using 180 individual pulse motors that can fire in any combination to make 3-dimensional course corrections in the final seconds of intercept. It does not miss very often. The numbers from operational testing are not publicly available in full detail, but the numbers that are publicly available should keep any Iranian missile officer awake at night. At 3:19 a.m., USS Philippine Sea began firing. The VLS cells opened in sequence. SM-3 Block II. A missiles came out of their canisters on columns of fire and smoke, each one accelerating through the pre-dawn sky on a boost phase trajectory that would carry it to the edge of space before it released its kill vehicle. 2 SM-3s assigned per Emad target. not because the TAO doubted the intercept geometry, but because 8 Iranian ballistic missiles aimed at a U.S. carrier strike group is precisely the kind of situation where institutional caution is the correct posture. 16 SM-3 Block IIA missiles, 8 targets. The math was already decided before the first interceptor cleared its canister. The Emad missiles were at apogee, 600 kilometers above the Persian Gulf, coasting through the black silence of exoatmospheric space in their reentry vehicles, when the first SM-3 kill vehicle separated from its third-stage booster. The kill vehicle's divert and attitude control system acquired the inbound reentry vehicle on its onboard seeker, processed the intercept geometry, and began making the tiny, precise course corrections that would bring 21 pounds of hardened aluminum and steel into contact with an Iranian reentry vehicle traveling at 3.5 kilometers per second. The first intercept happened at an altitude of 180 kilometers. The reentry vehicle ceased to exist in a brief, spectacular cloud of fragmented metal. There was no explosion visible from the surface. At 180 kilometers altitude, there is no air to propagate a shock wave. The target simply became debris. The second intercept, 4.2 seconds later, debris. Third, fourth, fifth. The SM-3 kill vehicles were working through the Emad salvo with mechanical thoroughness, each intercept happening above the atmosphere, each destroyed reentry vehicle falling back through the atmosphere as harmless fragments that would burn up long before reaching the Gulf. The sixth Emad reentry vehicle maneuvered, engaged its attitude control system, attempted a lateral jink of approximately 340 meters at 70 kilometers altitude. The SM-3 kill vehicle's divert system corrected. Intercept. Debris. The 7th Emad was destroyed at 95 kilometers altitude. The 8th, the last of them, was tracked by the second assigned SM-3 as its primary. The first SM-3 having already confirmed a kill on its designated target. Clean intercept. Complete engagement. 8 ballistic missiles launched. 8 ballistic missiles destroyed. Not in the atmosphere, not in the terminal phase where debris could endanger ships, but in space, above the Earth, in a layer of sky where no American sailor would ever feel so much as a pressure wave. The Abraham Lincoln's flight deck had not gone to general quarters. The captain had been called to the bridge at 3:16 a.m., 1 minute before the launches, had reviewed the intelligence picture, and had authorized the defensive engagement from the Philippine Sea, while his own ship's Aegis system tracked the threat and stood ready as a second layer of defense that was never required. He watched the engagement summary update on the display. 8 for 8. He said nothing for a moment. Then he told his watch officer to keep him informed and went back to reviewing the morning's flight schedule. That was not a performance of calm. That was the product of a system so thoroughly engineered for this specific problem. Iranian ballistic missile attack against a carrier strike group in the Persian Gulf. That the actual event, when it arrived, was handled with less disruption than a moderately complex air traffic control problem. The Abraham Lincoln was not in danger. The Persian Gulf threat environment had been war-gamed, rehearsed, simulated, and planned for continuously since the 1980s. The SM-3 Block IIA had been developed specifically to defeat exactly this threat. Tehran had, in effect, spent years building a missile program to threaten American carriers, and Washington had spent the same years and considerably more money building the specific system required to make that missile program irrelevant. But the IRGC was not finished. At 3:31 a.m., 14 minutes after the ballistic missile launch, the E-2D crew detected a second wave. This time, not ballistic missiles. Surface targets: 14 IRGC fast attack craft, Bogomar type, and Siraj 1 class vessels emerging from the Qeshm Island coastline and the shallow waters north of the strait at high speed. Armed with rocket launchers, heavy machine guns, and reportedly carrying C-14 anti-ship missiles on at least 4 of the craft. Short-range Chinese-derived weapons Iran had been distributing to its small craft flotillas for years. The swarm attack doctrine. Overwhelm point defenses with numbers. Get close enough that the distinction between a threat and a done deal collapses. The TAO aboard USS Truxtun looked at 14 fast attack craft spreading into attack formation at 32 knots and experienced what might generously be called mild professional interest. 2 MH-60R Seahawk helicopters were already airborne, having been launched from USS John Finn at 3:24 a.m. when the intelligence picture suggested a secondary attack was probable. The Seahawks carried AGM-114 Hellfire missiles and .50 caliber door guns. They were over the lead element of the IRGC swarm at 3:34 a.m., 3 minutes after initial detection. The lead Boghammer, a vessel approximately 13 meters long, carrying 6 IRGC Revolutionary Guards and what appeared to be a crew-served rocket launcher, was designated by the lead Seahawk crew at a range of 4.2 nautical miles. The AGM-114 Hellfire missile release was authorized by the rules of engagement. Hostile force demonstrating hostile intent and hostile act in the immediate vicinity of a U.S. carrier strike group that had just absorbed a ballistic missile attack. The Hellfire covered the 4.2 nautical miles in 11 seconds. The lead Boghammer ceased to be an operational threat. The second Seahawk engaged the lead Siraj 1 craft, longer, faster, carrying the C-14 anti-ship missile, at 3.8 nautical miles. 2 Hellfires, sequential release, first to defeat the C-14 launcher before a shot could be fired, second for the hull. The C-14 missile, still on its rail, detonated in the secondary explosion. The Siraj 1 was gone. What happened next is best described as a lesson in the difference between revolutionary fervor and combined arms warfare. The remaining 12 IRGC craft had scattered when the lead elements exploded. 4 turned back toward the Qeshm coastline immediately. The remaining 8 attempted to maintain their attack profile, pushing south at maximum speed toward the strike group's outer defensive perimeter. USS Preble's 5-inch Mark 45 gun mount engaged 2 of them at 9,000 yards, its automated fire control system cycling through targeting solutions at a rate that allowed it to put 2 rounds into the first craft before the second crew had registered that their lead element had been hit. The gun mount didn't pause. Third craft designated. Fourth craft. The Phalanx CIWS aboard USS Abraham Lincoln tracked and engaged a boghammer that had somehow closed to within 2.2 nautical miles of the carrier's defensive perimeter, the last line of the onion, the final layer before the thing that nobody in naval planning wants to have to think about. The 20mm Vulcan cannon required 1.4 seconds of fire. The Boghammer required considerably less time than that to become debris. By 3:48 a.m., 17 minutes after the swarm launch, the IRGC Fast Attack Force had ceased to exist as an operational entity. 8 craft destroyed or disabled. 6 withdrawn. 0 successful weapon releases against U.S. naval vessels. 0 U.S. casualties. 0 damage to any vessel in Carrier Strike Group 9. The Abraham Lincoln continued her scheduled operations. In Tehran, the IRGC Aerospace Force and the Naval Command faced the task of explaining to their political leadership what had happened. 8 Emad missiles, weapons Iran had publicly claimed were capable of striking American carrier groups, had been destroyed before a single one of them re-entered the atmosphere. A fast attack swarm that had been trained and equipped for exactly this kind of operation had been dismantled by 2 helicopters, a destroyer's deck gun, and a last-ditch cannon system. Iranian state media, which had carried breathless coverage of previous Emad launch exercises with triumphant commentary about the era of American naval dominance coming to an end, went quiet on the subject of this particular night. The Supreme Leader's office released a statement about successful military exercises demonstrating the readiness of the Islamic Republic's defense forces. There were no images of the Emad missiles reaching their targets, because there were no targets reached. There was no footage of the swarm completing its attack, because no attack was completed. There was only the AN/SPY-1B radar record aboard USS Philippine Sea, showing 8 ballistic targets, 8 intercepts, 8 debris fields falling harmlessly back through the exosphere, and the Seahawk gun camera footage that nobody outside of a classified briefing room would see for a very long time, showing 14 IRGC craft pushing into an engagement envelope where the math had already been decided hours before they left the dock. The Persian Gulf has been contested water for decades. Iran has spent those decades building missiles, fast boats, mine warfare capability, and a doctrine premised on the idea that asymmetric mass, enough rockets, enough small craft, enough desperation, can overcome the qualitative superiority of the American naval force that routinely operates there. What the IRGC planners apparently cannot fully internalize, or choose not to internalize because the alternative conclusion is too uncomfortable, is that the United States Navy has spent the same decades building the specific systems: the SM-3, the Aegis Combat System, the cooperative engagement capability, the MH-60R Seahawk, the entire layered defensive architecture that surrounds a carrier strike group like concentric rings of steel and silicon, specifically to defeat exactly that doctrine. Iran is not fighting a navy. Iran is fighting a purpose-built counter to itself, assembled piece by piece over 40 years, tested continuously, and waiting patiently in the warm water of the Persian Gulf for the moment when Tehran decides to find out whether it actually works. Now they know. The USS Abraham Lincoln completed her deployment and returned to her home port on schedule. The Emad missile program's next test, 6 months later, was observed by U.S. satellites and analyzed by U.S. intelligence within hours of completion. The SM-3 program office noted the available data and confirmed that no modifications to existing intercept doctrine were required. A flag was added to a database. A file was updated. The system continued learning, as it always does, incorporating every piece of information Iran reveals about its weapons into the ever-deepening library of solutions the Aegis Combat System will call upon the next time Tehran decides to find out whether American missile defense actually works. It works. It worked that night. And Tehran, for all its revolutionary confidence, sailed 8 ballistic missiles into a net that had been woven specifically around them, and got every single one handed back as scrap metal falling from the edge of space. Bye for now.